Arrogant and proud, he demanded honor from all. But Mordecai refused to bow, remaining faithful to God. Enraged, Haman sought not only to destroy Mordecai, but to annihilate all the Jews in the empire. He persuaded the king to issue a decree for their destruction, casting lots, or Purim, to determine the date. With the king's signet ring, Haman sealed the fate of the Jews, setting a day for their extermination. Panic spread throughout the Jewish community. When Mordecai learned of the decree, he tore his clothes and sat in sackcloth and ashes, mourning bitterly. He urged Esther to go before the king and plead for her people. But approaching the king without being summoned carried a death sentence, unless he extended his golden scepter. Esther hesitated, fearing for her life, but Mordecai's words echoed, "Who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" After fasting for 3 days with the Jews of Susa, Esther resolved to act. "If I perish, I perish." She entered the king's hall. When Xerxes saw her, he extended the golden scepter. She lived. Rather than immediately revealing her request, Esther wisely invited the king and Haman to a banquet. There she invited them again to a second banquet the following day, setting the stage for Haman's downfall. That night, the king could not sleep. He ordered the chronicles to be read and discovered Mordecai's loyalty in exposing the assassination plot. Realizing Mordecai had never been honored, the king asked Haman what should be done for a man the king delights to honor. Thinking it was himself, Haman described a lavish public parade. To his horror, the king commanded him to honor Mordecai in that very way. Humiliated, Haman's pride turned to rage. At the second banquet, the king pressed Esther for her request. With courage, she revealed her true identity. She was a Jew, and her people had been marked for destruction. Pointing to Haman, she declared, "This enemy is none other than Haman." The king, enraged, left the room. When he returned, he found Haman begging for his life at Esther's couch. Misinterpreting the scene as an assault, the king ordered Haman to be executed on the very gallows he had built for Mordecai. Though Haman was dead, the decree remained, for the laws of Persia could not be revoked. But at Esther's request, the king issued a new decree, allowing the Jews to defend themselves.
On the appointed day, the Jews stood united and defeated their enemies. What was meant for their destruction became a day of deliverance. In remembrance, the Feast of Purim was established, a celebration of God's providence and the courage of Queen Esther. To this day, Jews around the world read the Book of Esther and remember the faith and bravery that preserve their people. Esther's story is more than history. It is a reminder that even in exile, God's hand is at work. A young woman, orphaned and hidden, rose to become a queen and a deliverer. Her words still echo, "If I perish, I perish." Her courage teaches us that faith, wisdom, and trust in God can change the course of nations. Truly, Esther was chosen for such a time as this.
Jerusalem in the first century was a city of tension and expectation. The Romans ruled with an iron hand, yet the Jewish people held on to their faith and traditions, clinging to the promises of God. Festivals were not only times of worship, but also of identity, a way to remember who they were in a world that often tried to strip that away. 50 days after Passover, Jews from every part of the known world gathered in Jerusalem for the Feast of Pentecost, also known as the Feast of Weeks. It was one of the great pilgrimage feasts, a celebration of the first harvest, a time to give thanks to God for His provision. Yet in the midst of this bustling crowd, among the thousands who came to worship, A small group of just 120 followers of Jesus were waiting in obedience. They had seen their Lord crucified. They had seen him alive again. They had watched him ascend into heaven, and now they held on to his final words. "Do not leave Jerusalem, but wait for the gift my Father promised. For John baptized with water, but in a few days you will be baptized with the Holy Spirit." So they waited. They gathered in an upper room, praying with one accord, uncertain of what would happen. These were not the powerful or influential of society. They were fishermen, tax collectors, ordinary men and women who had staked their lives on Jesus. Some may have wondered how long they would wait. Others may have feared the authorities who had already condemned their teacher. But united in hope, they prayed. And in that waiting, the promise of God drew near. What was about to take place would not only transform their lives, but would alter the course of human history forever. Pentecost was not merely another Jewish festival. It was the moment heaven would break into earth in a way never seen before. The Spirit of God, who once hovered over the waters at creation, who spoke through the prophets, who filled the temple with glory, was about to dwell within his people. Suddenly it happened. A sound like a mighty rushing wind filled the entire house. It was not a gentle breeze, but a roar of divine power that could not be ignored. As the disciples looked around, tongues of fire appeared, descending from above, resting upon each of them. This was no ordinary fire. It did not consume, it did not destroy, it empowered. In that instant, they were filled with the Holy Spirit. Their hearts pounded, their lips trembled, and then words burst forth, words in languages they had never learned. They were proclaiming the wonders of God in tongues foreign to their ears, yet perfectly understood by others. The Spirit had come just as Jesus promised. The waiting was over. The church was being born in fire and wind, in power and glory. The noise spilled into the streets, and soon crowds gathered. Jerusalem was filled with pilgrims from every land: Parthians, Medes, Egyptians, Libyans, Romans, Asians, Arabs. They came running, confused but intrigued. And then they heard it. Each one heard the disciples speaking in their own native tongue. A Galilean fisherman declaring the praises of God in flawless Egyptian. Another proclaiming his glory in Latin. Another in the dialect of Mesopotamia. The people were stunned. They turned to one another in amazement. How is it that we hear them in our own languages? Are not all these who are speaking Galileans? They were bewildered, caught between awe and doubt. Some mocked, sneering, "They must be drunk." But deep within, many knew this was no ordinary scene. At Babel, long ago, humanity's pride had scattered them through confused tongues. Now at Pentecost, God was gathering them again, uniting nations through his Spirit. And then, in the midst of the commotion, one man stepped forward. Peter. Just weeks before, he had denied Jesus 3 times, trembling with fear before a servant girl. But now, filled with the Spirit, he stood with courage. Raising his voice, he declared to the crowd, "Fellow Jews and all who live in Jerusalem, listen carefully to what I say. These men are not drunk, as you suppose. It's only 9 in the morning. No, this is what was spoken by the prophet Joel. In the last days, God says, I will pour out my Spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions. Your old men will dream dreams." With power and clarity, Peter connected the event they were witnessing to the scriptures they knew well. This was not madness. Then turned their eyes to Jesus. He proclaimed with boldness, "Jesus of Nazareth was a man accredited